Hey guys, Yasin here from the Fantasy Life app. I'm here with Byron Lambert of Rosterwatch.com. We'll be talking about and reacting to news as it happens, as we get those notifications from the Fantasy Life app. And we will be answering as many questions as possible as well. So really the most important news that has come out in the last few minutes is really, it looks like Tyrone Smith of Dallas Cowboys O-line is going to have season-ending surgery, is what it looks like right now. So Byron, why don't we kick it off with some of your thoughts on Dallas in general and what this might mean and just the state of their O-line?
Well, as soon as the news broke, I looked back at a few things, Yasin, and it's interesting. Dak Prescott actually had his two biggest games of the season in the weeks that Tyrone Smith missed earlier this year with the neck injury. So generally speaking, I think what we see with the type of defense that Dallas has, what this offense is going to be, regardless of really the quality of the offensive line, it's going to be a huge year for Dak no matter what. They're going to have to score a lot of points. The Cowboys are. These games are just going to be shootouts. Where I'm a little bit more concerned, I don't know exactly what you're going to do about it. Maybe this becomes a trade option for you, is that Ezekiel Elliott, 3.9 yards per carry on the season. And, you're quickly reminded this isn't the Cowboys offensive line of just a few years ago that was all first rounders, considered the very best in the league. You lose a guy like Tyrone Smith, one of the best to do it in the last decade. And, they can still anchor to Zach Martin, but behind that, we have Connor Williams playing a little better, the draft pick from a few years ago. But, it's certainly, no longer going to be a top five, maybe not even a top 10 offensive line, Yasin. So what are you going to do about it if you own those principal players? Probably not a whole lot. I do think if you're a Zeke owner, it's something to keep an eye on. And, maybe if you can get the right deal, brings him into focus as a guy you could consider maybe liquidating in a trade if you're a losing team and got a few holes in your starting lineup to fill. And if you're not smitten with this situation with Zeke moving forward, he might be the type of guy that could bring back a real king's ransom to you and help make your roster more competitive. So I think it's something to keep an eye
on. Okay. And what do you think about Dak in general? He's been 500 yards last week was insane. What do you think is going to happen moving forward, certainly this week?
Well, I love the matchup at home with the New York Giants. It's a 54-point game total projected by Vegas right now, which is quite a few expected points. They do have Dallas as 9-point favorites, but that just hasn't held up at all this year, given the way their defense has been playing. They're allowing a lot of points. I actually think this is a breakout spot for the Giants, who had an incredibly treacherous schedule at the outset of the season. And historically, the Giants just go to Dallas. This is a Jason Garrett homecoming game. The Giants always play the Cowboys tough, and there's almost always a lot of points in these games. So this week, I'm still in love with Dak and all of his weapons in the passing game. Your guy Matthew Berry, I think, had it right. He came on our podcast during the month of August during fantasy draft season, Yasin, and he predicted Dak Prescott would be a top 3 fantasy quarterback this season. And that certainly looks like it could very well be in the cards. I don't see any reason to come off of it. You hate a deteriorating offensive line, but Dak is the kind of guy that he can move. He's going to move and make plays one way or the other. If it forces him to scramble a little more, that actually helps you in fantasy sometimes.
Cool. He made that claim before all of those injuries to the O-line for Dallas. So let's touch on that a little bit. The O-line is definitely different than last year. You had a major retirement. You have a major injury. And it looks like it's now confirmed that Smith will be going on having season-ending surgery on his neck. So should we temper expectations for anybody beyond Dak and Zeke? What's happening there? What do you think?
I think that all the other principles are going to be basically in the passing game, and I don't think they take a hit from this, really, Yasin. I think this puts Dallas in the situation where ultimately they're just going to have to pass the whole. Dak Prescott is on pace to blow out the single season record for passing attempts, and to me, a deteriorating offensive line and a porous defense really only enhances that situation. So I think it's mainly Zeke's efficiency we've got to watch out for. What are you really going to do about it? I think is the big question. If you're a Zeke owner, so I think you can still feel pretty good about the overall situation with most of the players.
Cool question.
But you're right, Travis Frederick, man. I mean, he was a Pro Bowler. Lyle Collins was a stud. I mean, and now Tyrone Smith. This is an entirely different unit than it was. They're going to really need Connor Williams, a former Texas Longhorn they drafted a couple years ago, to step up big.
Yeah. We have a question in the YouTube chat. CeeDee Lamb or Josh Kelly at the flex spot, half PPR?
I think Josh Kelly's probably the safe play. It's a great option. I'd probably go with Josh Kelly in that one. I mean, no Austin Eckler. I'm probably going to roll out Josh Kelly. I think he's probably a safe play for the volume. CeeDee Lamb's been awesome, but there's been a couple weeks where maybe the targets go to Michael Gallup instead.
Cool. So it looks like Lamar Jackson is back at practice. As expected, the knee and the illness weren't going to keep him out, and he's very obviously going to start for his game. Do you have any concerns at all? My guess is no.
No, I mean, again, like what's your recourse? I guess is I think what you're going to look at in these situations, Yasin.
We have another question. Should I start Joe Mixon against the Ravens? This person has Hunt and Mike Davis.
Well, I can just go straight to our rankings and tell you exactly who we would start in that situation. I don't foresee a situation. I think Kareem Hunt's a must start. So this is Joe Mixon versus Mike Davis, and as much as I think that Joe Mixon is very much a potentially sell high candidate in our season long leagues right now. I think it's going to be very, very hard to bench him for Mike Davis. I'll just tell you here, we have Joe Mixon as our number 10 running back on the week. It's the number 23 matchup. I mean, if you look at it, Antonio Gibson, people thought he was going to be in a really tough spot last week, and Antonio Gibson was able to do damage in the passing game and put about 20 fantasy points together in a half-point scenario. If the key, forget about the 3 touchdowns last week with Mixon, Yasin, or the 40 fantasy points. It was the 6 targets that were the key metric in that game. If that's what Mixon's fantasy value is going to be. I don't want to say entirely contingent, but strictly tied to. That's going to be a big deal this year. So I think if we saw the breakout in the passing game for Mixon, it was unforgivable the low target volume he got in the first few weeks. That's a real mitigating factor. So Joe Mixon, our number 10 running back of the week. Mike Davis, our number 17 running back of the week, which I think is a real compliment for a player like Mike Davis. But I can't bench Joe Mixon. We're not gonna make that move.
Cool. We have some more questions. Le'Veon Bell, what are your thoughts on him? PPR rest of the season.
I don't think about Le'Veon Bell.
I don't like to hear that. I haven't rostered
about Le'Veon Bell. It's a trash situation. The line is bad. They've got Joe Flacco starting. The head coach is terrible. I mean, Adam Gase and Dan Quinn and Bill O'Brien, those 3 guys need to meet up at the bar. Because those are the worst head coaches in the league. And really, I want to say Matt Nagy in Chicago is terrible too. But I guess he's 3-1. So, what can we really say at this point? Le'Veon Bell, look, last year, here's the thing. We're hoping for an improved situation over last year for Bell. I think when you distill it all down, it's not any better. It may be worse. And so Bell last year was a target-dependent, low-ceiling RB2. I think that you are praying for that kind of production from Bell the rest of the way. So I would treat him like a flex. My expectations if I owned Bell was as a flex. I suppose if his owner in your league totally hates him and he's meaningless to his owner, I can get Le'Veon Bell as a throw-in on a deal or an easy pickup in a trade or something. I would consider that, but I'm not bullish on it.
And as far as him coming off of IR, I think the most recent word or opinion is that he will likely be taken off of IR and be ready and expected to play on Sunday. For those wondering, we should get official word on that by 4 p.m. on Saturday latest. That's assuming the Jets game does not move because of the COVID test that returned an initial positive this morning. My understanding is that by the end of the day, we should have the second result for that player to see if there is indeed a confirmed positive on the Jets. But while we're talking about the Jets and while we're talking about the possibility that game gets pushed, let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals and how you think this might affect them, and maybe some backup options, Byron, that you think might be good if that game does get either pushed or for some reason, rescheduled to a different week, which, again, I don't anticipate happening, but we don't know with COVID. So what do you think about Arizona Cardinals? Because there's probably not many Jets players that people are rostering at the moment for us to discuss the impact there.
Well, I think you're incredibly frustrated as a Kenyon Drake owner, and that's devolved into what could be a really bad situation. We're going to see what happens. A lot of people think Chase Edmonds might be about ready to steal that job. So I think that's something to watch in terms of like contingency plans for this situation. I mean, this is all new, and we kind of all contemplated it in the off season. We added IR spots to our leagues for COVID, but it's kind of surreal once it starts to happen. How are you going to deal with all this? So, there's not a total roadmap, but I think the template for me is treating these games like in the past, if you had a important player that was maybe going to be a game time decision or questionable for the Monday night game, like in that situation, you're not going to bench that guy unless you have an option that's 75-80% as good as that one is in a game prior to. Otherwise, you're going to kind of like take the risk, and you're going to have somebody else on your hopefully somebody else on your bench in this situation from one of these other games. I mean, we have 2 games on Monday and a third game on Tuesday now. I'm assuming that Tuesday game is going to count towards week 5. So you need to be in your league looking at like what Patriots, what Broncos, what Bills, what Titans, like are any of those guys on your waiver as emergency options if you're waiting to play, DeAndre Hopkins, and all of a sudden that matchup goes south on you. I mean, unfortunately, I would like to think that we're going to know a little bit more before the games kick off on Sunday, but as obviously this stuff is very touch and go with the way these tests are coming in.
Cool. Let's jump over to Tampa Bay really quick. Bruce Arians was asked if Chris Godwin might be able to return to practice next week. He's already missed 2 games with a hamstring injury. His answer is it's way too early. I'm hoping he can do something by next Thursday. What are you thinking on Godwin? What do you think about Tampa Bay in general?
Yeah, I think Chris Godwin is one of the best buy low candidates in all of fantasy football right now, Yasin. I think any sharp player that's in a winning position in their league, maybe a one-loss team, an undefeated team, or a team that's stacked with a bunch of assets they can afford to make the move. I absolutely believe you get Chris Godwin at a discount right now, especially with that narrative coming out of Bruce Arians. So in that situation, like I think you should be making a very concerted effort this week to go after Chris Godwin, Yasin. He's the kind of guy that is going to he could be a league winner. We've seen in the 2 games he played in, he produced very well. I'm a big believer in Tom Brady and this Buccaneers offense. Chris Godwin himself, a player I've seen at training camp the last 2 years in Tampa, that kid is a beast, and he's a perfect fit with Brady. He loved him while I was there. So I think big production is in store for Chris Godwin down the stretch, and he would be a huge add. So I'm bullish on the Bucs. I still like Godwin. If I own him, I'm not selling low on him. And if I don't own him and I'm a winning team, I am looking in every league I'm in to see
So you're
if
looking,
I can acquire Chris Godwin at a discount. Right?
so Godwin's at a discount. He's a good trade candidate to buy. I want to talk about trades for a minute. Let's talk about AJ Brown. Obviously, he's still giving in what is expected would be limited practice participation if they had practices in Tennessee. There's also a lot of uncertainty around Tennessee at the moment because of all the COVID testing results. So I personally like to see. I personally like to buy low on guys that have a lot of that uncertainty that might be wiped away really quickly. Because if I'm an AJ Brown, if he's on my roster, I'm really frustrated, not just with him and his lingering injury, but also with the fact that the Titans can't seem to get their act together around COVID. Am I buying him low? I personally am saying yes. I'm going out to the guys that are rostering him now and trying to buy him low. What do you think? Do you have an opinion there?
Yeah, he was on my buy low list this week, Yasin. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, because that game is slated for Tuesday, the people that have held out this long owning him, it'll be interesting to see whether they're ready to budge off of him at this point, or if they've absorbed so much of a lost season from him so far that they're just going to, wait and see what happens on Tuesday. But I agree, circumstantially, there's a lot of reason to believe that AJ Brown is a buy low, which is great news because he was a guy being overdrafted that was overvalued in the preseason, coming off a hyper-efficient season in a low-volume passing offense that likely simply can't be replicated. But look, we know that the rest of the receivers on that team stink outside of Jonnu Smith. And the fact is the Titans now have their buyout of the way. So if you have a guy that is goosey about A.J. Brown or has kind of just lost interest in him, which to your point is very possible, absolutely he's a great target. And he's a guy that could give your team a big injection down the stretch. And you raise a great point from a strategic perspective, Yasin. So oftentimes we're trying to buy low in the fantasy football trade market based on recent performance. Maybe we know a guy is better than he's been recently producing, or the underlying metrics indicate that there's, a lot of meat left on the bone, and we know it's a buy low, and we know maybe our opponents aren't looking at all these factors. Well, the other way to kind of create an artificial buy moment on players that maybe aren't necessarily underperforming are when the bye weeks come into play. So that creates, if you have a team that is in a tenuous situation that needs to win now, and they've got some good players going into the bye, maybe those players haven't been underperforming, but simply the fact that they're not available all of a sudden can create an artificial moment for an opportunistic player to come in and try to buy on them. So the reason I raise that is not this year, that does not only apply to the buys. This COVID situation is now giving us other opportunities. All of a sudden you have Derrick Henry missing a game, or Cam Newton missing a game, or A.J. Brown missing a game, or all of a sudden it looks like Derrick Henry missed a game last week and he might miss another game this week. Like, you wouldn't ordinarily have any opportunity to buy Derrick Henry. So just the fact that that opportunity may exist circumstantially in your league is noteworthy.
Yeah, I actually put in a trade offer for Derrick Henry yesterday because I'm pretty sure the person is a bit frustrated with all the potential news coming out of Tennessee. So I'm trying to buy low, especially because I lost Saquon in that league and a few other pieces to injury. So I can understand the mentality of wanting to buy low on those guys, and I think it's a valid strategy. I want to go back to some of the questions that people are.
It's the right thing. It's the right thing to do, and you should try to trade two lesser players for that player if you can, because then you can liberate a roster spot for a waiver ad that's going to be critically important.
So while we're talking about that, by the way, my number one trade advice to anybody is always, if you're looking to trade somebody away, put them into your starting lineup. Don't try to trade for a guy like Derrick Henry with two guys that are on your bench. Even if you're not going to play them on Sunday, throw them into your lineup. It's still Friday. Throw them into your wide receiver 1 or 2 slot. And that's how you can increase the perceived value of that player, so that this person doesn't feel like they're giving away their top running back for 2 of your bench guys that you're not playing anyway. Okay, so this person is asking DJ or Mixon in PPR.
David Johnson or Joe Mixon?
I think that's what we're going with. David Johnson or Mixon?
Well, we've got David Johnson. Let me see here. I've got David Johnson. What did I say? I had Joe Mixon at number 10. So David Johnson, we have at 15. I don't know, man. I like David Johnson's matchup a little bit better the more I look at this. This might be something I have to go back and reconcile. I'll tell you what, I think I'm going to play David Johnson this week.
Cool.
And I'm actually going to update our rankings here right now live on the broadcast.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Nick Gutierrez, for giving Byron a heads up that he needs to update his rankings. Also have another question. This person is asking, this is more of a strategy question we alluded to a little earlier. Does this person keep Derrick Henry in his lineup with everything going on? I'm going to give my personal answer, and my answer is no, not at the moment, because you want to be prepared in a worst-case scenario. So I would plan ahead and expect that he's not going to be playing, even though it looks like there's actually a really good possibility that he does play this week. You don't want a donut for this week. I mean, unless you're 4-0 and you can really afford a donut and lose this week, I would have a backup plan for Derrick Henry and all Tennessee Titans players. What do you think, Byron?
Well, certainly you should have a backup plan, but to me, what this person's asking is eventually, are they going to have to just fire that bullet on Sunday instead of waiting until, Tuesday? So you can have the backup plan. The question is, are you going to exercise it? So to your point, you'd like to have some backup options maybe on those Monday games so that we can get another day of information on what's going on with that Titans situation. And, another key point is if you are going to keep Derrick Henry in your lineup, you should keep him in your flex position. That way, if some reason he's unable to go or you have to pivot, you can pivot to a tight end, a wide receiver, or a running back. If you leave him in your running back position, it's going to severely limit your options. You'll be pigeonholed into only being able to replace him with a running back, and that can spell a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that's a good strategy for anybody playing on a Monday night. You want to put them into your flex spot if possible so that you have options, especially if they're questionable or have limited participation in any practices throughout the week. So let's talk about, let's go to questions more. Is McKinnon worth starting over someone like Michael Gallup with Mostert back? This person is a full-point PPR league.
Well, do we have clear confirmation that I saw Mostert was limited in practice yesterday? I heard Jimmy G might be going. I think we need to wait on the confirmation. I think Jerick McKinnon right now, even if Mostert comes back, especially in this matchup, retains flex value. He looks damn good. I think this is the player they were hoping to get a couple years ago when they signed him. 5.7 yards per carry for McKinnon, and very involved in the receiving game. I like him. I actually just obtained Jerick McKinnon in a trade where I kind of got him as a throw-in, and even with Mostert coming back, I'm not totally scared off. The question is, this is a question between Gallup and McKinnon, and I just think McKinnon's been a more reliable player. I would stick with McKinnon this week.
I agree. So news just dropped that if Cam Newton is unable to play this week, they're going to be starting Steedham instead of Hoyer. How does this impact the overall players on the Patriots?
I mean, I don't think it's going to be any worse than it was with Hoyer, which really wasn't good for anybody except for Damian Harris. And we like Harris a lot. I think he been a great waiver pickup the last few weeks and a good stash. To me, it remains to be seen, what the fullest expression of his role is going to be this year. I think a lot up in the air. But you would imagine with Stidham in, and Stidham's a guy who can move. He's a lot more mobile than Hoyer. They might run some kind of, I could see them running a little more diversionary stuff out of the backfield. So, yeah, to me, this just tells me Patriots continue to lean on the running game. And, that paid off for Harris last week.
Cool. So we were talking about Derrick Henry earlier. I want to provide some clarity there. So this morning, the test results from this morning, no new positive COVID test results from Thursday's batch of tests. If that trend continues and tomorrow there are no positive tests, we could see them get back to practice tomorrow, which would give them an okay amount of time to practice and actually have the game move forward as scheduled, as rescheduled to Tuesday. So my personal opinion for the people that are expecting to maybe play or not play Derrick Henry is pay attention to tomorrow. See if they have zero results again. That would be a positive indicator. If they have any positive results in tomorrow's test, that's not a good position to be in, and I don't expect. I would not feel confident playing any Titans player on Tuesday.
Or Bills player by proxy, right?
Exactly.
It sucks. It doesn't even have to be the team with the sick players, and you're in. It's creating a very difficult situation across leagues right now.
Yeah. I hope everybody went with expanded benches and additional IR slots. We did that for all of our leagues that we're in. So let's go to some of the other games that are happening this week. So we have Jacksonville and Houston. Any thoughts there? I know, again, I think you may have actually been to both of these training camps this year. Is that right? Or I know at a minimum you went to Jacksonville's. So you might have some insider insight there.
I've been at Jacksonville.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been at Houston in years past. I mean, James Robinson, you just continue to fire away with him. You feel awesome. He's got three more good matchups in a row coming off of last week. I mean, he had an excellent month of matchups in front of him starting last week. So you feel awesome with James Robinson. I think Gardner Minshew is certainly a player you can start this year this week if you're in a pinch at quarterback, which definitely you could be. There's Stafford and Rodgers on bye, and other folks have been affected here. Cam Newton potentially still out. So I think Minshew is definitely a play. Shenault, you know me, Yasin. I tried to tell you a month ago about Shenault.
You did.
I mean, he's a guy you can roll out every single week now if you need to, as like maybe the last flex on your roster or as a wide receiver 3. Sharp got in the end zone last week. Big game for him. He's a good player. I think he's still basically a wide receiver 2. I think you want to have proper expectations. But obviously, you feel good about all your Jaguars. And on the Houston side, David Johnson, we just talked about it. I mean, David Johnson, he almost scored last week. David Johnson, another guy that has basically a month of good matchups in a row that began last week. So I think you keep plugging away here. I think he looks just fine, and you feel good about starting David Johnson right now. As a matter of fact, David Johnson is somebody I tried to buy low on here recently.
I agree with that. I like David Johnson as a buy low candidate at the moment. I want to jump really quick.
He can help you win. He can help you win right now, Yasin.
Yeah, his matchups are attractive coming up.
It's the number one thing we always need to be concerned about is winning right now.
So, Byron, I hope you don't mind me promoting you a little bit, but I actually really like what you guys do, and some of these people might not actually know. So I'm Yasin from Fantasy Life. Byron runs Rosterwatch. One of the reasons that they do really well and why guys like Matthew Berry is a big fan of the work that Byron does, and why I was proud that he had called Laviska Shenault weeks ago is he actually goes to the training camps, and he does this every year. And they get really good analysis based on them actually seeing these guys in person and getting a good understanding of how they fit into game plan, and being able to talk to some of these players is really helpful. And I think you guys have built out a really strong reputation because of that. And that's why you were able to, I think, call Laviska Shenault as somebody who's going to be an emerging player this year and probably for years to come. Also, apologies to everybody. We know that there is a slight delay on the audio. That'll hopefully be fixed next week. We might go to a different platform to stream, a streaming service to use on YouTube. But please bear with us for that. It's only our second time doing this. I'm going to go back to some of the questions here. So this person is asking for which 2 to start this week in full PPR. They're asking about Devontae Parker, Robert Woods, and Deontay Johnson. Who are you sitting?
Well, I'm not sitting Robert Woods, that's for sure. So this, to me, comes down to Parker, who, let's see, Devontae Parker, he has kind of a difficult – these guys, see, the reason he's asking is Devontae Parker at San Francisco. It's the number 29 matchup of the week. I think there's a 51-point game total on this one. See, Devontae Parker we have as our number 24 wide receiver. Yeah, but look, we got, you know what? We got Juju right there, too, and Deontay right there, number 10 matchup. I'll play the matchup. Deontay Johnson was the guy, man, before he got injured. So let's just play the matchups in this one. I think you've got 3 good options. I'm not sitting my Rams wide receiver. I'm simply not doing it. Woods is just a good option. So I'll go Woods and Deontay Johnson there.
Does the fact that this person also has Robbie Anderson on his roster change any of your opinions?
Oh man,
that is his. He's saying that's his other starter. So I think he's intending to start Robbie Anderson, Robert Woods, based on your recommendation, and then either Parker or Johnson. But do you think that Robbie Anderson should be sat in favor of, I suppose, Devontae Parker? My opinion is no. I think he's got it right.
I don't know, man. I think I would sit Robbie Anderson. I think I would play my studs in this situation. Look, Robbie Anderson could be a stud. Another guy I've seen at training camp, and it's like he's a good player, man. He really is. This is not just all an accident, what's happening right now. He's a good wide receiver. So, but in the end, this is still Robbie Anderson. People think there could be finally the DJ Moore breakout. I know he looks like the wide receiver one. We're not. I don't think we're all the way there yet, Yasin. To me, Devontae Parker, he's been good, even kind of injured. He's been pretty serviceable, and he's starting to get healthier. We've seen he's a guy that can dominate tough matchups, man. I'm putting Deontay Johnson, tying myself to Ben Roethlisberger and all those targets at home, again, in a great matchup against Philadelphia. Robert Woods, to me, is basically very, very close to a must start. I think I'm playing Parker over Robbie Anderson. I'm not going to outsmart myself.
Okay, fair. I think I like Robbie Anderson because of Teddy Bridgewater's matchup this week. But again, look, we can only give advice based on what we think could happen. But everybody should understand that there's a variance of what could happen, right? So there could be a 40% chance that this player outperforms that player. But there's a 60% chance that he underperforms the other option. So something to remember when you guys are setting your lineups is as long as you have good logic behind your decision, you can't be upset if the guy on your bench ended up being the better option to start. You have to move forward with logical decisions. You're not a genius because you predicted that somebody who did not have a good game script, did not have a good matchup, outperformed somebody else. I mean, we're talking about variances here. So you need to go with the option that in the majority of scenarios is going to outperform the other player. That's how I look at it. That's how I think others should look at it. Nobody should be looking at it as, okay, this is the person that will definitely outscore. Because nobody's going to produce a report that says 100% of the time this player is going to have a better statistical line than another player who's also a starter on another team. So as long as you're using logic behind your decisions, you guys should be confident with who you're playing. And then the rest of it is, it's not up to us. It's up to the players and up to the coach.
Exactly. There's a range of outcomes. I mean, that's what all these projections and rankings represent, is basically the distillation of the range of outcomes that are, potentially in the cards for a player this week. The other thing I would say about Parker is just make sure. I mean, it looks like we're going to get Fitzpatrick this week, but just you have to make sure that Fitzpatrick is going to be the starter in this one. Otherwise, I think it's an easy pivot over to Anderson. And I mean, to your point, Teddy Bridgewater, one of my very top waiver wire quarterback. I'm starting Teddy Bridgewater this week. I'm a Cam Newton owner. I had to pick up Teddy Bridgewater, and look, there's such a thing as having 3 or 4 good options, right? So if some people are like, I got these 3 guys, I got to start 2 of them, and there is such a thing as the fact that you have all 3 of your options are good. So I think in this situation, this particular user, it's difficult to go wrong with any of those guys.
Yeah. Let's talk about David Montgomery. PPR, is it time to trade him away? I think people are just getting by with his production and just happy enough. But I think this question is emblematic of what people are feeling, which is maybe somebody else doesn't know what it feels like to roster David Montgomery and they would be okay with his stat line. But maybe they're not so excited about him moving forward. So maybe they're saying this is the time to sell. Or are we potentially selling low? I personally think he's outperforming what he will typically do, but what do you think? You know this stuff better than I do.
Yeah, actually, it's to the contrary, Yasin. David Montgomery is a player you should be trading for right now. And I'm glad to hear, from your perspective, that you still think he's basically a sell low. I was a little worried that the touchdown last night, which was, would basically artificially inflate his value, it might take that off the table. But it sounds like you think there's a pretty good chance that Montgomery still is just viewed as kind of a lowly asset in leagues and could still be had for cheap. So if that's the case, I'm going after David Montgomery, and I'll tell you why. Because he's coming off incredibly difficult matchups against the Colts and the Bucs. Those are two of the worst matchups in the entire league for fantasy running backs. These were predictably bad spots for David Montgomery. Nick Foles is a big mitigating factor. I think you can see what he's going to do for this offense. And if you look at Montgomery's schedule moving forward, it's a lot more enticing. So I think the schedule eases up big. I think we saw them try to get him more involved this week than last week in what was still a tough matchup. I don't totally trust Matt Nagy, and we'll have to see the snap count coming off of last night. But David Montgomery was an 85% snap count participant last week, Yasin, that's the elite of the elite for snap counts when it comes to running backs in this league. And that's meaningful for Montgomery because he's got 3-down capability. I mean, you could see he's getting the targets. Look at how much better he is catching the football than Ronald Jones. David Montgomery is a natural catcher of the football. He can play on all 3 downs. He's a good pass blocker. So to me, all the underlying indicators say we're much more likely to see a breakout from David Montgomery than him just flatline here the rest of the way. So if what you're saying holds true and David Montgomery is undervalued in your league, that's definitely a guy I'm looking to buy low on. That's a good flex. If David Montgomery is your flex the rest of the season, that's good.
I think the concern for people like me is his receptions have definitely increased. He's obviously a nice target, and I think Foles is a boon for him in PPR leagues. But the Bears are rushing. He has 10 attempts the last 2 games. 10 attempts each of the last 2 games, and he's averaging under 3 yards per attempt, and he's had 1 rushing touchdown. So, that's why that's why I'm not really sold on him yet. And it looks like he had more rushing potential earlier in the season. Though, it sounds like you're bullish on David Montgomery. But I actually yield to you.
Bullish is a strong words, but I'll take him. I'll take him right off your hands, Yasin. I'll take him right off your hands if you want me to. I think bullish is a strong word, but look, it's the Matt Nagy element that you're speaking to. That's the point. The part I don't trust. Will he properly deploy and utilize him? That said, I think you can explain David Montgomery, who was 4.1 yards per carry before last night on the season, which isn't inspiring, but it's a silver lining. I think you can explain what's happened in the last 2 games in the matchups they've had. They've gotten behind in very difficult matchups, and that's not a spot where a mad scientist like Matt Nagy is going to feed the running back. So that concern's not going to be alleviated. The schedule eases up and snap counts there. So, look, none of these guys are perfect. You got to take your chances. And from what I know about David Montgomery, if I can buy him low, I'm taking my chance.
Cool. I have a trade question for you. We have a question asking if Connor and Ingram is a fair offer for Derrick Henry, or is Connor and Ayuk a fair offer for Derrick Henry?
Yeah, those are fair. Those are exactly the type of trades that you want to execute if you're a winning team in your league. You want to take 2 lesser players, package them up, consolidate them for 1 premium player in return. That way you're going to not only improve your starting lineup, but now you've liberated a roster spot that you can backfill with another key waiver pickup. Think about all the waiver pickups you want to make throughout the season that you can't do because you don't have anybody to drop. This is the way to slowly, step by step, build the overall quality of your roster. Those 2-for-1 trades for guys like Derrick Henry.
Cool. This is a question I really like. And this is a question that I think you can answer nicely. How much do you take over/under point total into consideration when you're deciding to start or sit somebody?
I take it in. I definitely take it into account. I mean, I look at is the team favored? What's the projected game script? Is the guy I'm looking at, am I looking at a running back who's projected to be playing from behind by 10 points as a huge underdog? Or am I looking at a receiver who's going to be playing from behind, as a big underdog? I mean, those are two different stories. So I'm looking at the projected game script based on the spread. I definitely look at the game total. Like if I have two guys I can't decide between, I'm definitely going to play the guy that's got a 54-point game total versus the guy who's got, a 44-point game total. I'm also looking at the snap counts. I want to see how many snap counts those guys are playing. Obviously, I'm looking at the touches. And then one other thing we can do, Yasin, is when we look at the matchups, we can see if there's a funnel to that position in the matchup. So sometimes you'll pull up the matchup tool at rosterwatch.com and you'll see that every matchup on the slate for the opposing team is difficult except for like the running back is a super easy one. Well, that's a funnel. That tells you this is a funnel towards that running back production, and that's something else that you're going to want to look for.
Cool. I have another question from the app, so let me get to it here. We have somebody asking who you trust more, Gallup or Hollywood. Let's assume rest of season. Let's assume half PPR.
I think it's Hollywood. I mean, the volume is not there, but he's the lead receiver. Michael Gallup's not.
Okay.
I get it. It's a more prolific offense, higher volume passing deal with Dallas, but I'll probably stick with Hollywood.
How do you think Hayden Hurst will do the rest of the season in PPR?
Fine. I traded Hayden Hurst and Deebo Samuel last week for Mark Andrews. I think it was a season changer for me. But that wasn't because I didn't like Hayden Hurst. It's because I wanted to execute one of these consolidation trades for a premium player that we've been discussing and improve my roster and help my team win last week with a great matchup that Andrews had. But I like Hayden Hurst, man. You want a piece of this Falcons offense for sure. And he's looked good. And as a matter of fact, the OC came out this week and said they got to get Hayden Hurst more involved. So I like him.
Flex option this week, Laviska Shenault, Emmanuel Sanders, or Traquan Smith. I think just to update everybody else, Mike Thomas was a limited participant in practice yesterday. Still unclear if he'll play. My expectation is he will. I don't know how effective he'll be or how much he'll play. But what do you think there?
I think it's three good options, but I would go with Shenault because I would have a difficult time deciding which Saints receiver to go with. When Michael Thomas is out, you want Traquan Smith, not Emmanuel Sanders. But when Thomas is in, it's unclear. So Shenault, to me, is a good play, a good flex play this week.
Quarterback question, Matt Ryan or Minshew?
Well, let me just go to our quarterback rankings to answer that one. Let's see here. Matt Ryan or Minshew. So it's going to be Matt Ryan we have as our number 8 quarterback on the week. Gardner Minshew we have as our number 13. So I think Gardner Minshew is like an awesome waiver wire quarterback option this week, or like one of the very best QB2s that's out there. But we're definitely going to stick with Matt Ryan in this scenario. At home against Carolina, big game total. This is a good spot for the Falcons to rebound.
Okay. Have a question for a Cardinals about a Cardinals player. So assuming the game is on and it doesn't get pushed to another week, Kenyon Drake or Deontay Johnson in the flex, half PPR?
No question, Deontay Johnson. Don't trust Kenyon Drake any farther than we could throw him right now.
Okay. Gaskin, Gibson, or Kelly? Sit 2 of them. Pick one to start.
I mean, it's Gibson or Kelly. That's a really, really difficult call. On paper, that matchup against the Rams is actually a pretty good matchup, even though we think of the Rams as a formidable opponent. I'd look at the snap counts. Let's look at the snap counts and the touches from last week. We know that Antonio Gibson had his most fantasy points, his most touches, his most targets, his highest snap count of the season last week, and is looking really good, but it was still only a 44% snap count last week for Antonio Gibson. Clearly he's their lead guy, but I'm curious here with Eckler kind of going down mid-game. Josh Kelly, 57% snap, 12 touches. We saw Justin Jackson coming for 40%, 8 touches, a little tougher matchup. I'd probably roll with Gibson. I don't think there's any punches to be pulled here with Gibson. He's the lead guy, and he can get very involved in the passing game. So I think it's a safe play.
Cool. I would actually go with Gibson as well. Same person has another question. Crowder or Jefferson, PPR?
I mean, Joe Flacco to Jameson Crowder or Kirk Cousins to Justin Jefferson in that game against the Seahawks. Man, I'm rolling with Justin Jefferson.
Me too. Also, again, assuming the game gets played, I don't expect there to be a delay there unless some bad news comes out later today from the Jets. But,
by the way, Antonio Gibson, our number 22 running back on the week, and Josh Kelly, our number 24 running back on the week. So
cool. So let's talk about. Let's go to another game from this week. Let's talk Panthers Falcons. I know you want a piece of basically both offenses, right? In general, I think Carolina has a really good matchup for Bridgewater. And we talked a little bit about Robbie Anderson and some of the other options for Carolina. Let's talk a little bit more about the Falcons. What do you think for this week?
We got to see today what happens with Julio Jones. That's obviously very, very noteworthy because if he doesn't go, then people have a horrible taste in their mouth from the Calvin Ridley, this Calvin Ridley situation this last week. But let's see here. It's surprisingly Carolina has kind of bowed up against the fantasy wide receiver in recent weeks. Carolina Panthers, the number 25 matchup in the league for fantasy wide receivers, a lot stouter than I would have expected. But they've slowly been tightening up that defense in recent weeks. It's a 53.5-point projected game total. Falcons 1.5-point favorites at home. I'm firing up all my Falcons this one. Probably the guy I still love, Todd Gurley. In terms of like we talked about with David Johnson, Todd Gurley was a guy with 5 consecutive good matchups on the horizon, beginning I think last week. So he's just plugging away here. I'd keep capitalizing on those. You're starting all your Falcons. We said it. Matt Ryan, it's a get right spot. Julio Jones doesn't play. It's a little bit of a downgrade, but what are you going to do? You're playing all your Falcons this week.
Cool. Let's go over to Cincinnati, Baltimore. You have a rookie quarterback. I think only one rookie quarterback has won against the Ravens in the past however many years. And I think there's a case to be made that there's a possibility that a second one wins. I think it's a long shot, but what do you think?
Well, I think that the Ravens' defense has looked a little bit more vulnerable, and Joe Burrow is on pace to surpass Andrew Luck in terms of passing yardage as a rookie, which isn't a huge surprise because really that was always the comp for Joe Burrow, is that he's the best quarterback prospect to come out since Andrew Luck, one of those guys that comes out, like every 10 years. Maybe we'll get another one with Trevor Lawrence this year. So as far as Burrow's concerned, man, you feel awesome. Like Joe Burrow, what a stud, man. I think he's actually like a guy that if you have to, you can start him. It's the number 8 matchup of the week for fantasy quarterbacks, Cincinnati at Baltimore. It's a pretty good matchup for the tight end, Drew Sample, the young tight end, who kind of skunked us a couple weeks ago when he got his first full-time action. But we saw Drew Sample come back to life with the targets and some production this last week. So maybe Sample. You're always scared about rolling out a prospect like him in a matchup at Baltimore, but maybe Sample, like if you're working really far in the basement at tight end, is an emergency option you can still look at this week. And I think we saw from Antonio Gibson last week, Yasin, that a player like him, our comp for Antonio Gibson at the Senior Bowl was Joe Mixon. So these are two similar players. And we saw Antonio Gibson put up 20 points last week in this same matchup. So I know we're kind of gearing up for a little bit of regression and maybe from Joe Mixon here. A couple tough matchups on the horizon after the big predictable breakout last week. But I think we could take a little bit of solace in what Antonio Gibson did last week and seeing Mixon get the targets that holds up. Those are two very similar players there. AJ Green, man, I mean, he's almost basically waiver wire fodder at this point. I mean, I don't even think you could trade him as a throw-in on any deal. So Higgins, Boyd, you feel very, very, very good about. And then on the other side, I think Lamar Jackson, they said he had a stomach bug this week, and he looks like he's going to be a full go.
Well, we should also talk about, coach of the Bengals just said that Geno Atkins will be available on Sunday as well.
Well, you're not starting any Ravens running back at this point unless you absolutely have to, right? Like, you put Mark Ingram in begrudgingly and only good matchups if you have to, and that's really the only guy. And then anytime Mark Ingram gets his value up by scoring a touchdown or whatever, like, you should be trying to all out that week to sell him. Yeah. Anytime you can sell high on Mark Ingram, like, it's a mandate. Like, any opportunity you get, it doesn't happen every week, but anytime his value's up, you should actively be trying to sell Mark Ingram. So, I mean, you get a guy like Geno Atkins back, that's not good for anybody. That could flush Lamar Jackson out of the pocket a little more, maybe make him a little bit more of a runner this week.
So that negatively impacts Hollywood?
Yeah, I think it probably.
Maybe positively impacts Andrews?
Well, that said, Hollywood is the kind of guy that can really break free on a scramble drill. So when you have somebody like Lamar Jackson break pocket, and then somebody's got to guard Hollywood Brown for any amount of time, like, that's the kind of guy that can get pretty loose deep like that. So I'm not sure that that's horrible for – what's been bad for Hollywood is just 6 targets a game. Like, that's just not going to be a reliable amount. I think we see even Mark Andrews is going to be extremely touchdown dependent this year. I'm not totally sold we're going to get out of him this week. What we got, last week, it's certainly a more difficult matchup there. But I think you start Andrews, you start Jackson for sure. Hollywood depends on what your other wide receiver 3 or flex options are there. And on the other side, I think Boyd and Mixon, basically continue to be nearly quasi must starts, nearly must starts.
Okay. What about Big Ben or Herbert this week? Who would you start?
I would start Big Ben. This is, I think this is a good spot for Big Ben. They're healthy, coming off the week off. They kind of get the, big interstate rivalry here, cross-conference rivalry. And, the Eagles are banged up. Eagles are a little bit banged up right now, so I feel safe with Ben Roethlisberger. Herbert, you like. It's a big game total, but on the road in the Superdome, can be a pretty formidable defense at times when they get hot. It's a situation where he could melt down on the road as well.
Cool. Keenan Allen, thoughts on him rest of the season?
You feel a lot better about him now than you did when Tyrod Taylor was the starter, that's for sure. I mean, if you got 5th round Keenan Allen, which is where he started to become a pretty good value in drafts, I think you feel like a king right now, man. Like, Keenan Allen looks like a solid wide receiver too the rest of the way. I mean, Justin Herbert is a franchise changer, Yasin. Another guy we saw at the Senior Bowl. I mean, and he coming out and like the Drew Locks, the Josh Allens, the Carson Wentz. He's basically kind of, of that mold. The guy is mobile. He's got the big arm. He had a terrific Senior Bowl. I think everybody's surprised to see him come out this hot, but it's very refreshing when you see a young live arm like this, and you see a player like him. It jumps off the screen that this is a franchise changer for the Chargers. So it's great news for Keenan Allen.
Cool. We had a question on who we see as the Patriots starting quarterback this week. That's one of the reporters mentioned that's most likely going to be Steedham, just as an FYI. Other questions. Somebody asking about White, Justin Jefferson, or Marquise Brown as flex in half PPR. I assume they mean James White. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not going to rely on James White. So to me, those are two basically nuclear wide receiver options. So let's play the matchups in that one. Justin Jefferson, the number 1 matchup in all of fantasy. A 57-point game total. He's been going bananas. I'm curious to see, because we know Hollywood's snap counts, or we know his targets really haven't been that inspiring. I'm curious to see. We know the production's been big for Justin Jefferson, but let's actually drill down. I'm right here on the snap counts, touches, and targets tool over at Rosterwatch right now, Yasin, and here's where we can quickly analyze the Justin Jefferson 77% snap count, 5 targets in week 4, 103 yards. Week 3, it was 78% snap count, 9 targets. So he's like a 7, let's say he's a 7 target guy, 78% snap count. And what we've been seeing out of Hollywood Brown is 6 targets, 79% snap count in week 3. 8 targets, finally, most of the season, 75% snap count. So it's 2 incredibly similar profiles. Dude, I'm playing a matchup here. This is your guy asked earlier, when do we look at the game total? This is exactly it. And we got 2 players we're trying to split the hairs on that are they profile similarly. We're going to look at the matchups. It's the number 1 matchup in all of fantasy for Justin Jefferson. Number 9 matchup for Hollywood Brown. But look, the Ravens again, we want to look at the game script. The Ravens, 12-point favorites at home. Historically, that favors the Ravens running backs. The Vikings, 7-point dogs on the road. Historically, a big dog like that favors the wide receivers. So we got a better matchup. We got a better game script. We got a better game total for Justin Jefferson. That's how we'll split the hairs between those 2 really excellent options this week.
Okay, I have an interesting question from the app. Interesting because I actually have a strong opinion on this. This person says, currently have Tanyan, Cook, and Schultz at tight end. Would you drop one of them for? In my opinion, the answer is yes, regardless of who you're picking up, because you have too many tight ends. But they're asking specifically if you drop one for Lindsey. They could also drop Hardman. Again, 3 tight ends is just too many on a roster for me. So I'd look to. Tight end isn't usually a deep position, so I would try to trade if possible. But it's not like you're sitting on Kelsey here, so I don't know what the appetite is for trade value. What do you think? Who are they dropping, if they're dropping anybody for Lindsey?
Well, it's good analysis. I think you should always consider trading these guys before you just flat out drop them. They could have value to somebody else in your league. It's the same thing with backup running backs like Tony Pollard and Madison and all these guys you don't want to just drop them. You want to try to trade them to the owner of the principal running back in that setup where they might retain some value before you just totally throw them away. So in this situation, I think if you had to drop one, I think you'd have to say it's probably Jared Cook at the moment, which I don't really like dropping him because I think when he's healthy, he's a solid tight end in this situation. I just think Lindsey's I agree with you, Yasin, that you should never roster 3 tight ends. It makes no sense. It's actually that's losing behavior to do things like that. On the other hand, I think is this guy a Melvin Gordon owner? Like, is Philip Lindsay a marginal pickup? I don't know. I think he's a flex. He's an RB. What's he going to be? Your RB4? When are you even going to play him? Like that's where I question it. Are you dropping somebody valuable even though you don't need 3 tight ends for what's a marginal move for a guy you're never even going to play?
Right.
So I would consider dropping Hardman. Let's see. I'm curious what Hardman's. I know from week 3 we were really watching for Hardman to maybe take another step in week 4. Let's see what he did here. Mecole Hardman, 46% snap count, 4 targets. Dude, I would drop Mecole Hardman for Philip Lindsay. And
keep all 3 of those tight ends? Or no, you're about to say you would figure out something to do.
Yes, figure something out with those guys in the next week. Tanyan's on a bye right now. But see what happens with Cook. Let's find out if Cook's going to get healthy and resume his role. Let's get one more game out of Dalton Schultz. He looks for real. Like, to me, he looks like Schultz is a guy almost looks like he could start every week rest of the season. But maybe we get another chance to just verify that. And then I think this player is going to have a lot of good options moving into next week.
Sounds good. Let's move over to Miami, San Francisco. So news just broke that starting left tackle Austin Jackson is going on IR, just as an FYI. Now, he started all 4 games for the season. They've done a good job. Miami's protected their quarterback. I think they've had maybe a handful of sacks this season. So they don't really have a long-term solution. Does that affect anything? And do you have any other thoughts on the Miami offense? And then we'll talk about San Francisco as well.
Well, it makes you feel better about 49ers defense in either DFS or in season long at home. I mean, it's an injured 49ers defense that worry it's not the same as last year, but you get Dolphins coming cross country, compromised at a very important position on the offensive line. I think that's a real problem. I mean, Myles Gaskin to me is like, he's getting the volume, but he's just not really a prolific player. So if he's like a marginal flex decision for you, that could be enough for me to come off of him for, maybe somebody I view as in a little bit better of a situation this week. It concerns you about the Parker situation we talked about. It's a tough matchup. Is Fitzpatrick going to have time to get the ball out? Is Fitzpatrick certainly you're not starting Fitzpatrick this week then. Definitely not doing that. A lot of people started him last week when they got into a pinch with that good matchup at home against Miami. I think you have to totally pivot off of that. We can't predict injuries, but God forbid he gets wrecked and all of a sudden we have Tua coming in. I mean, you think these are all things that could come up. So yeah, maybe it backs you down a little bit on Parker, backs you down a little bit on Gesicki, by the way, a top 10 tight end in standard formats on the season. Maybe that's something to look for. And the other thing this creates, I said it's good for the 49ers defense. This could be good for the 49ers running backs. We talked about McKinnon earlier. If all of a sudden this becomes a game where Miami's more compromised, then San Francisco's able to dominate them more than traditionally. We understand that that's going to lend itself to the production for the 49ers running backs.
Let's talk about Gesicki a little more. Somebody's asking, and I think the answer here is no, but they're asking if it's time to bail on Gesicki. They're asking if they should drop him for Logan Thomas or Ebron.
Well, I think the reason they're asking is because the fantasy numbers have made him a top 10 guy, but the volume has made you really, really nervous, I think, in recent weeks. Let's take a look here. Mike Gesicki, 63% snap count, only 3 targets last week, 15 yards, and in really a matchup that people thought was going to be a little bit, maybe better than it turned out to be for him. Let me see, Durham Smythe, the other tight end there, 41% snap count. So it's kind of looks a little cannibalistic what's going on in week 4 there with Miami. Let's see here. Yeah, in week 3, only a 49% snap count, the same 3 targets, the same 15 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, so I'm nervous as hell about Mike Gesicki at this point. And if he looks like a top 10 or 12 fantasy tight end in my league just based on the sum of his fantasy production, regardless of the underlying numbers to this point, like if that's marketable in your league, I think you're absolutely right. You should be looking to either package him up and ship him out, maybe for somebody you view as better, or you need to be cultivating other tight end options in case Gesicki, ends up being relegated to a tight end 2 or bench option as the season progresses.
Cool. All right, we have a question about T. Higgins or Justin Jackson in the flex. Let's assume PPR.
Ooh, that's a good question. So let me see where we have T. Higgins ranked right now. So T. Higgins, let's see. So T. Higgins we have basically as wide receiver 39, so like a fringe flex or low end wide receiver 3. So I'll probably play Justin Jackson in that situation.
Let's jump over to. Let's talk about Raiders Chiefs. Let's talk about the Chiefs offense, some of the players there, and then we'll move over to the Raiders. What are your thoughts there? Especially with
Hilaire was a prime buy candidate all week this week. Not because you're going to buy low on Clyde Edwards-Helaire ever, but like we said, it's a tremendous development when guys like that are even potentially available in your league. So, the underlying fantasy production just hadn't been eye-popping for Clyde Edwards-Helaire in recent weeks, but at 77% snap count, 22 touches a game the last few weeks, 21 touches a game on the season. Like everything you love to see is there for Edwards-Helaire on the rest of the season, being tied to Mahomes, obviously, and Andy Reid. And it's the number one matchup per the matchup tool at rosterwatch.com for all fantasy running backs is the one that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is getting this week. So I absolutely love him this week and really beyond. He has several good matchups on the horizon. I love Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now, Yasin, if you can't tell. So if there's any type of buy window on him and you have people in your league that don't understand how good his situation is about to become, again, he's not going to be a buy low, but dude, I would take Joe Mixon and another decent player, and I would trade the hell up for Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now if I could. Those are winning moves. So feel great about that. I mean, very potentially a huge breakout spot for Travis Kelce. Almost every week is a huge breakout spot for him, but at home against the Raiders, this is a sweet, sweet spot for Travis Kelce. I mean, you feel great about Tyreek Hill. And if you're in a pinch, you roll out. Look, if you need we're talking about T. Higgins. If you need one of these guys that's like a fringe wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4, that's like an emergency flex player, wide receiver 3 play, like you want these dudes with upside, like the T. Higgins we just discussed is not a horrible option. Or in this situation, Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, that's always a fine desperation play just because of the upside.
Cool. Have a question for standard leagues. Gaskin, Ingram, Freeman, Harris. Start 2. I have an opinion here, but why don't you go first? I think I'm starting Gaskin for sure out of all of them.
Yeah, I think so, just based on the volume, right? Let's see. Myles Gaskin. It is the number 23 matchup of the week. Yeah, so I think we get Gaskin in there. And then the kind of the tough nut to crack is what's going to happen with Damian Harris this week, right? So let's look at his snap counts in week 4. Damian Harris with New England. Let's see here. 31% snap count, 17 touches, 100 yards. I mean, that's very difficult to rely on. It's going to be a matchup with the Broncos, which I think is a fairly difficult.
That's a lot of touches for only. That's a lot of touches for only. What did you say it was? 37% snap count.
30, yeah, it did. It's 30. Yeah, 30-something% snap count.
That's a lot of touches. That's not a high snap count.
No, it's not. And so you understand what that means is that's unlikely to be a sustainable configuration.
It was also his first game, though, so I think it's too early to tell. I think maybe the team is trying to figure out where he fits in.
Yeah, I would. I mean, ideally the snap counts are going to go up, right? But none of that is given in a Patriots backfield at all. But that's what would stand to reason. It is the number 26 matchup of the week at home against the Broncos. It's not a great matchup on paper for Damian Harris. So we're going to go with Gaskin. And who were the other options?
Ingram and Freeman.
Dude, I think I put Freeman in, man.
I'm going to cut you off. No more answer on that one, only because Browns coach Kevin Stefanski said tight end David Njoku made it through practice week 100% healthy and will be activated from IR. He will be active on Sunday. Does this change anything? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, if you were about to get faked out by the little blip on the radar that Austin Hooper had, where he looked like he might finally be starting to create some value, I think you could throw that out the window now with David Njoku back, right?
So David Njoku back, Austin Hooper value goes down. You think it's possible that was just a blip recently. What do you think about David Njoku's performance moving forward, though? Does this potentially impact OBJ or any of their other options, especially because Nick Chubb is now out of the picture?
I mean, they don't like David Njoku in Cleveland. Their scouting department, their player personnel people, they don't have a great view of David Njoku. So that's not a player that team is long for or has much of a commitment to. They invested a big pick in him a few years ago. He's got some skills that I think can excite, obviously with some of the red zone capability, big play ability. But, dude, he can't block, man. So that's a player that's not going to get in on a high snap count. So I think he could vulture a touchdown here and there from that might have gone to somebody else, but I don't look at him as like super impactful. Maybe what will be interesting to see is what are the Browns going to do if sans Nick Chubb? I mean, that's a ground and pound team who wants to run.
Let's talk about that. I mean, we saw a lot of production on the ground from the Browns last week. And it actually wasn't Kareem Hunt that saw that production. I mean, he still had a productive day. But let's talk about their backfield a little bit. What do you think is the impact fantasy-wise for the Browns?
Well, what you're suggesting is there was Dearness Johnson that came in for 23% snap count, 13 touches, 95 yards behind Nick Chubb. It was Kareem Hunt with only a 35% snap count last week, which you would have thought we would have seen more. 11 touches, 71 yards, did get the 2 touchdowns. I think that what my eyes tell me, as somebody who's scouted these NFL players for a decade now, is that Kareem Hunt looks like one of the best running backs in the NFL. And he would be a top probably 3 or 5 guy on his own anywhere else. When you're scouting running backs coming out of college and you're trying to figure out like what they should look like or if it's a good prospect or not, like Kareem Hunt, this version of Kareem Hunt, this is what you want your elite running back prospects coming out of college into the NFL to look like. So I think Kareem Hunt is, even in a very difficult matchup this week, is still a must start. Dearness Johnson, I think, based on what we saw, is a logical flex play. It's certainly not a guarantee, Yasin, but Cleveland, it's Indianapolis. It's that terrible matchup with Indianapolis that David Montgomery had last week. It is at home, so it's going to be tough. But I think Kareem Hunt's the kind of guy that can produce despite that situation, and I think Dearness Johnson is a flex play if you're kind of in a pinch, is the way that I would.
But it sounds like Kareem Hunt is the guy to roster from that team.
Yeah, he's a stud, man. He's an absolute stud, and we'll see. I mean, his snap counts and touches have to go up. I mean, logic dictates that has to be the situation.
I agree. Let's talk Washington for a quick minute. Steve Sims is being placed on IR. Terry McLaurin is good to go. I think he was limited in a practice or 2 this week, but he should be good to go. I think all that really means is we're going to see more of him this week, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is all you can eat for Terry McLaurin the rest of the way this year. No, we can get a little bit nervous about what Kyle Allen means to this offense because that sounds like a dumpster fire of a quarterback situation, which actually it is. But look, Dwayne Haskins wasn't good. It's not like Dwayne Haskins was good. And Terry McLaurin has been awesome on the season, even under those circumstances. And one thing I'm reminded of, actually for Gibson and for McLaurin, is if you think about what Kyle Allen did last year in Carolina, who were the 2 players that benefited the most? DJ Moore had a big season with Kyle Allen. Christian McCaffrey had the monster season with Kyle Allen. I've scouted all these players. Terry McLaurin is a very DJ Moore-like player and actually better. Those are very similar players. And we got Scott Turner, Ron Rivera. They've all come from Carolina to Washington. I think it all sets up just fine, even with Kyle Allen for McLaurin. He's going to get the volume. That was the type of player that Allen really was able to feature last year. And then Antonio Gibson, they've already come out and said it. Like they view him as a Christian McCaffrey type in Washington in terms of his skill set. So I'm really hoping that we see Kyle Allen coming in could mean that we're going to see Gibson get fed in the passing game, which is huge for fantasy.
So let's talk about Gibson a little more because we do have a question asking, what do you think is the likely outcome for Antonio Gibson rest of season? Is the hype justified? I'll answer this one first. Yes, and I have a very positive opinion of him rest of the season. What do you think, Byron?
Yeah, it's totally justified. Antonio Gibson's an RB2 the rest of the season with upside. If they give him the snaps, they give him the volume, it could be more than that. strictly due to his prowess in the pass receiving game. Like I said, he's a Joe Mixon, David Johnson type. I mean, we identified him. I was the first person in the entire industry to discover Antonio Gibson at the Senior Bowl this year. I mean, I said, guys, because Keyshawn Vaughn was injured, and Antonio Gibson was there at practice. He was going to be a wide receiver that week. He got bumped over to play running back because Keyshawn Vaughn went down first day of the Senior Bowl. And I looked at all my buddies in the industry there. I said, you guys, this guy, watch this kid from Memphis, man. This kid looks like Joe Mixon or David Johnson out here, and I think we've seen that come to fruition. So look, I'm not benching. I benched Antonio Gibson last week with the Ravens matchup, and I'm simply not benching him anymore. Like, I think he's the real deal. We're a little bit worried about his snap count. That said, Yasin, let's flip it on its head. We want to be opportunistic here, strategic. If there's that much hype in your league about Antonio Gibson right now, which there is, because I can tell you the scaredest players in my leagues, the guys who are scared to do anything, people I call chicken littles in life, Yasin, people who live in an irrational state of fear, the guys that are always a step or two behind in life because they have to wait. They have to wait until they're comfortable to move in on anything. They don't buy a stock until it's already really high, right? Because they can't get comfortable to them. Those people are starting to come out for Antonio Gibson right now. So if that is the case and the hype is permeating the ethos that much, Gibson's not an untouchable. If Gibson's that popular and I could take Gibson and package him up with somebody else and get up to an Edwards-Helaire or a Zeke or one of these guys, like, that's what smart players do.
Good to know. Somebody's asking, Noah Fant or Mark Andrews, rest of the season, PPR. I'm personally going Andrews. What do you think?
I mean, it's Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
Noah Fant could finish better, but it's like you said, there's a range of outcomes. We got to distill it down to like what's the expected value, and the expected value of Mark Andrews is certainly greater.
Yeah, and I think he had. I mean, the quarterback situation with Fant doesn't really make me too confident in general.
Yep.
All right, so we have another question. This person likes their running back depth. It's an 8-man league. They could trade CEH for Mike Thomas and still be okay. Should he trade for Mike Thomas?
Well, what I call those are roster balancing trades. This is a one-for-one interpositional trade. Well, you got to have a purpose in mind when you make trades. So nobody's ripping each other off in this circumstance. So what would be the purpose of making this move? It would solely be to balance your roster, specifically balance your starting lineup so that you're fielding a more competitive outfit every single week. So if you need a wide receiver and you're so deep at running back that you can ship off Edwards-Helaire, then do it. Like, does it make your starting lineup better? Are you short at wide receiver and deep at running back? It's a fair deal. It just depends on your needs of your roster.
Cool. All right, so this is interesting. We won't send it out as an alert, and I'll read it to you guys. But as far as we won't need you to chime in here, Byron. But looks like the NFL Senior VP of Officiating just sent out a memo today that any individual who approaches an official without a face covering is subject to a 15-yard penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct, as well as possible fines, suspensions, and forfeiture of draft picks. I think the NFL is finally realizing that. To me, that says the NFL is a little nervous about their season playing out for the entire year, and they are making major adjustments to ensure that the season is not at risk. Nothing that we can really, we can't really give opinions on what that means for fantasy. Just an important thing to note, since especially because we're not sending that out as an alert because it doesn't affect fantasy, but does give us sort of an idea of where the NFL's heads are at in terms of the rest of the season. They are taking this very seriously. Okay, so let's jump around to another game this week. So we already talked about Giants and Dallas. It sounds like you think it's going to be a shootout.
Should be.
What's the over-under that you guys have on that game?
Let's see here. 54 points. I mean, it's the third highest total on the slate.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk Vikings Seahawks. I know you have high opinions on Justin Jefferson. You can't have anything but a great, fantastic MVP opinion of Russell Wilson. What do you think is going to happen here? I'm curious to know what the over/under is here.
Yeah, it's a monster. 57-point expected game total. Seahawks 7-point favorites at home. I mean, it's the biggest projected game total on the entire slate. Vegas thinks this one's going to be an absolute bonanza, a shootout. Yasin. So, to me, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett are both conceivably top 5 to 7 wide receivers this week. I think there's clearly enough production to go around. They both can perform well. We'll see. They usually alternate which one has a huge game. But if you own Metcalf or Lockett, you feel like a king this week. I think it's a great spot for Chris Carson. It's the number 9 matchup of the week. 7-point favorites and a big game total. I would expect to see Chris Carson have a really nice week there. And then on the other side, I think everybody knows you're starting Dalvin Cook. You're going to start Adam Thielen. It's the number 1 matchup of the week for fantasy wide receivers, and kind of by proxy, we said that trickles over to Justin Jefferson too. Justin Jefferson is not a must start, but if you own Jefferson in a competitive league, and he's a pretty strong flex play based on what we know this week. To me, the big question is, and I don't know how many people are looking at this, but have we come to a point where you can consider playing Kirk Cousins, who obviously is kind of like a QB2, and you'd have to be in a bad quarterback situation to even contemplate it this week. But it's the number 2 matchup of the week. Dogs on the road, 57-point game total. We're starting to see this Vikings offense heat up a little bit. I don't put it out of the question that Kirk Cousins has a decent week here, Yasin, and I'm not telling people to run out and go start him, but I think if you're shuffling through the Joe Burrows and Gardner Minshew's and some of the other high-end maybe quarterback 2s of the week, I absolutely believe Kirk Cousins will deserve some consideration there.
All right, so we have some questions that have trickled in. Start 3 of these 5. Let's assume PPR. Chark, Deontay Johnson, Justin Jefferson, Boyd, and Robert Woods. I'm saying that I would start Boyd and Robert Woods. Of the other 3, I think I'm going Deontay Johnson. What are your thoughts?
I agree with that.
Okay,
I agree with that.
So we're doing Boyd, Woods, and Deontay Johnson. We're sitting Justin Jefferson and DJ Chark. I don't think those are terrible options, though. So regardless of how that shakes out, you should be happy that you have those options to potentially roll out. We have another question. Henderson or Josh Kelly, half PPR?
Darrell Henderson?
Yeah.
Oh, no question. Josh Kelly. Zero question. Josh Kelly.
Cool. Somebody's asking a question about Mostert. I'll answer this one. They're asking if Mostert's going to play on Sunday. I know he's been limited in practice the past few days. Yes, that is true. We're waiting on word. So this is a West Coast team. Their injury reports, nobody's injury report is due until 4 p.m. Eastern. Well, that's technically not true. I believe they are due at 4 Eastern, but for sure news came in about Drew Lock. Drew Lock is healthy enough to dress for the game. If he is, he will play. So
yes.
Expect that to come out. So just as an FYI.
Yes, says a Jerry Jeudy owner.
Yeah, sorry I got distracted there. So back to Mostert. Mostert he plays West Coast for a West Coast team, which means that we're probably going to get official word on if he is playing this week or not. And we're also going to have Stefania Bell in the app later on answering injury questions, so she'll probably address something about Mostert, and we'll have more clarity by then. That'll be after 4 o'clock tonight, so jump back into the app when we send that out. We have another question. Thoughts for DJ, people that are rostering DJ Moore. Are we keeping him as a weekly starter? When Godwin comes back, he can start with Boyd or Moore, or look to trade Moore. What kind of advice do you have I think DJ Moore owners are a bit frustrated, as you can tell, and as we both know. And I think your thought is that he was it him that you said was being drafted above his value?
He was a guy that was. There were a few of them, but Moore was. Oh, AJ Brown was the one that was. But DJ Moore wasn't a player we were getting an enormous amount. I think we were probably getting like at least slightly sub-average DJ Moore exposure. I roster him on one of my teams, so like I think for most people, you're unfortunately just stuck with DJ Moore at this moment, and you're gonna have to see what happens. Hopefully, in a tremendous matchup this week, and then see if if you can maybe have a few more options as to what to do with him after this week. But like if you sell him now, you're doing nothing but selling low. And it's a good matchup. So I think rationally, you probably got to keep him. You've probably got to play him this week. The only caveat I would give to that, Yasin, is if somehow I was a losing team in a must-win situation this week, and I've identified the reason I'm losing is because I've got some holes in my starting roster. And if some winning team in my league comes along and is trying to pick off Moore and maybe a couple other guys on my team, but maybe they don't totally undervalue him, or they're not trying to rip me off, or they're not trying to totally buy low. If it was a must win, I would consider selling him if it was for players that I thought for sure could help me win, could help me more this week is what I'm trying to say. But other than that, I think 95% of teams are just stuck with DJ Moore and wait and see holding pattern.
Yeah. Okay, thoughts on trading Diggs and Cam for Aaron Rodgers, I guess, and Boyd.
For Aaron Rodgers and who else?
They only said Aaron and Boyd, so I don't know. I assume they mean Aaron Rodgers because Cam is in there on the other side. So it's Diggs and Cam for Aaron and Boyd.
Yeah, it's an irrational trade. Like, what's the purpose of that trade? You're trading all players from the same position. It's unclear, right? That's a waste of time to consummate deals that are totally unclear. It's a same position for same position trade. You might, and by the way, it's not like you're getting anything out of it this week. Cam might not play this week. Aaron Rodgers is on bye this week, so I don't understand what's the net benefit. You guys need to quickly be able to get to the bottom line and understand what the who are the principal players involved in these deals? How meaningful are these trades? What's the net fallout from these? Do they actually help your roster? Do you even need multiple players in return? Are you getting the best player in return? Are you buying just to buy? Are you buying low? Are you selling? Are you selling high? What are you doing here? Have you identified your needs? I mean, those are all the things that you've got to consider if you want to make strategically optimized decisions on the trade market, Yasin.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's jump over to. Let's go Saints Chargers. They have a bye week. Packers Lions also have a bye week. We already played Bucks Bears. Let's go to the Bucks really quick though. I think a lot of people were heartbroken by Scotty Miller last night.
Oh man!
I'll just give the mic over to you. Talk to us about Scotty Miller.
That's a tough one. Yeah, you would have thought he was in a decent spot. You wonder if maybe being banged up was part of it. I think that was a game you expected the Patriots were maybe going to run away with a little more there. I thought the Buccaneers, but they kind of let that game devolve a little bit. I think the game script got away from them. It was a tough matchup on paper. That said, it was a tough matchup on paper for fantasy wide receivers. Think about it. Really, the only thing that even saved Mike Evans' night was the touchdown. Otherwise, It would have been an abysmal night basically for everybody on the Bucs offense outside of Ronald Jones. So,
I have to ask though, Scotty Miller, I know it sounds like you're being an apologist for a minute, but it was the matchup so terrible that it warranted, I think the number was 0 targets. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, it's a huge disappointment. I think you got to remind yourself that anytime you're toiling with players of the ilk of the Scotty Millers of the world, that this is the risk you run. And fantasy football hurts, man. Right? It hurts badly when these kind of things happen to you. So, fortunately, you had to dig deep if you had to put him in. I will say something from a scouting perspective that is exciting for me to see is that with Scotty Miller struggling, with Justin Watson unavailable in this game, we did get to see Tyler Johnson, the rookie from Minnesota, kind of a
Colt, I think he had the only stat line.
Kind of like a Colt, C-U-L-T, like a – what's up?
I think he's the only one that had a decent stat line outside of Mike Evans' touchdown,
and you
right?
saw, like, he's a Colt favorite among draft nicks and was really, really unheralded by the NFL scouting community. I saw him at training camp, and, you know, he's a little bit down the depth chart, but he certainly looked like a player that belonged. I was really excited to see, like, he looks like a good player. Now, there's too many other guys on the depth chart, I think, for him to have any relevance clearly this year or maybe even, you know, in the next few years. But he could turn into a wide receiver 3 for the Bucs. I think if maybe in a dynasty perspective, he's an interesting guy to stash.
Okay. Let's jump over to let's talk about the Bears, since we just had their game last night and we just talked about the Bucs. So what are your thoughts on the Bears? What do you think Nick Foles has done for this offense? We talked about David Montgomery. Seems like you're actually happy with his production and you think it'll be solid production, especially in PPR moving forward. Let's talk about Allen Robinson. I think he had 17 targets or 14 targets, translated into 10 receptions. And then, you know, any further... Yeah, so we can talk about that, but then I want to talk about the rest of that depth chart, the rest of the wide receivers there, because is it attractive enough to look at rostering some of these guys?
Depends on how deep your league is. I don't really think so. I suppose you could look at Mooney at this point, who looks like he's vying for that number 2 spot, but not like his production was really big. I mean, the problem with the Bears is just trusting the coach and the scheme there. It's just very, very hard to buy in. It's unfortunate to see Anthony Miller is kind of like just falling down the depth chart, even though he had a couple of kind of important receptions last night. I don't know. I think it's a mess behind Allen Robinson. The good news is that Nick Foles is a big-time mitigating factor. Allen Robinson had a very formidable schedule on the horizon for like the next 6 weeks, beginning last week. But just getting Nick Foles at the helm, like, it's a mitigating factor. Allen Robinson is a target vacuum. He's the lead guy by a mile. And you could see the minute Nick Foles came in that game a few weeks ago, Allen Robinson's whole demeanor changed. He's getting the ball downfield, and he played like he never wanted to see Mitchell Trubisky on the field ever again. And so Allen Robinson, to me, is a must-start. He's basically, I don't want to say matchup-proof, but close to matchup-proof. So to me, Nick Foles is important. Is definitely an important mitigating factor that enhances all these guys. And look, I think we saw it with David Montgomery last night. So look, I'm not inspired by David Montgomery's recent production, but I'm inspired by the underlying trajectory of where this thing is potentially going. And Nick Foles is part of that. And hence the touchdown last night. David Montgomery's night would have been a complete disaster if he doesn't get the touchdown. And I think that's the kind of stuff you're going to get because Nick Foles is there.
Yeah.
By the way, Jimmy Graham, I mean, you can start Jimmy Graham if you have to in your fantasy leagues this year. I mean, Matthew Berry was tweeting about it last night. Like, maybe one of the most undersold narratives at the outset of this season is Jimmy Graham returning to fantasy relevance.
Yeah, I can't blame anybody.
It's not reliable.
Look, we've been hearing the same thing for years, that Jimmy Graham is going to be he's going to, wake up from the dead and be a reliable fantasy option. I don't blame anybody for just putting him on his do not draft list, because we've gotten burned so many times by Jimmy Graham the last few years, and he's had fantastic options to turn into a stud, and our opportunities to turn into a stud, in my opinion. It just never panned out. So I'm still hesitant. I think has he had a touchdown in every game so far this year?
It's been very touchdown dependent. And look, I completely agree with you, Yasin. I mean, we see Jimmy Graham's career trajectory in the same way. What I'll say, though, is Chicago is at least utilizing him in that way. That's the big difference. We weren't getting that in the last couple of years, and that was the problem. Anybody that's that touchdown dependent is very tough to project it's going to be sustainable, reliable production at that level on the season. In the end, you're always going to rank him as a tight end 2, probably. But what I think we're seeing is that the numbers are putting him, to date on the season as a tight end one. And like, look, people are playing the Mo Alley Coxes of the world and all this other kind of stuff. Like if you're doing that, you can this year you can look at playing Timmy Graham.
Okay. We have a question. Flex, half PPR, Tim Patrick or Henderson?
Man, I might play Tim Patrick. That sounds so crazy to do, though. I don't know. That's filthy, man. That feels really filthy and slimy to say and to do. I think maybe I'll go. We're worried Akers is going to be back in the fold this week, Yasin. I mean, that's a tough spot to be in, man. That's a tough spot to be in. Maybe I go Henderson. Maybe I just go Henderson. I think Patrick is a good full-blown desperation play this week, but I think that's exactly what he is. In the end, I think you'll probably see Henderson ranked as a flex across the industry at this point.
Talking about Cam Akers, just as an FYI, our users should already know this because we sent out the news yesterday, but Cam Akers is on track to play this weekend. He's been a full participant. So you guys should slot him into your lineups or feel comfortable that he'll be playing this weekend. It seems like it's not like he's an emergency. It doesn't sound like he'll be an emergency option. It sounds like he's been a full participant and he'll be good to go. We haven't talked about the Colts. We did talk about the Browns, but let's talk about the Colts a little bit. Colts offense, what are you thinking?
I think that if you are like in an absolute desperation situation is the only time you would ever consider starting Phillip Rivers. I'd say probably the same for Mo Alley Cox. So you want to talk about touchdown-dependent tight ends who've been the subject of a lot of acclaim lately. I mean, 46% snap count, 2 targets, 1 touch, 13 yards, and a touchdown for Mo Alley Cox. In week 4, he's like the quintessential kind of archetype for that type of player. To me, you're not. Jonathan Taylor is the guy, man. I mean, we talked a lot about buy lows on this broadcast, and he's another guy I saw floating around on the message boards this week at Rosterwatch.com that seems like people are a little bit down on. To be truthful, I'm not blown away with him or his situation. I do think there's, a lot of upside and promise that remains. So to me, like Jonathan Taylor, if you were able to get in on him in your trade market right now, I think is a pretty good option. It's a 47.5-point game total. They're at Cleveland as 1-point favorites this week, the Indianapolis Colts. The number 3 matchup of the week for fantasy quarterbacks, which brings Phillip Rivers into viability as like a deep QB2 desperation play. It's the number 19 matchup of the week for the fantasy running back. And then for the tight end, it's beautiful for the tight ends and the wide receivers on the Colts side. It's too difficult to suss out who it's going to be. We had a 75% snap count, 8 targets, 58 yards for Zach Pascal last week. T.Y. Hilton has fallen off the proverbial cliff, 75% snap count, 5 targets, 29 yards. I mean, you got Trey Burton playing now, Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox. Things devolved to a 3-headed tight end monster. So I don't know, man. I don't think you can really play anybody other than Jonathan Taylor and maybe Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear about T.Y. Hilton. He's had 13 receptions the entire year. 13 receptions the entire year. He hasn't been.
Even his grandma called him and told him that he doesn't look like himself.
Yeah, something is not like right there. And you know what? I wonder. I wish I had access to some of the stuff that's out there in terms of like top speed that players are running at. Because I saw a stat about OBJ about how 2 years ago and last year his average speed on routes was something like, I don't know, maybe like a whole mile per hour slower than his average speed this year. Some sort of stat like that. But it makes you think, okay, maybe that groin injury was actually more serious than we thought. And T.Y. Hilton has battled a lot. Was it calf or hamstring or both last year? And it makes me wonder if he's just not up to, not physically himself this year, and it's just a down year. But then, is it a down year or is it a down 2 years? Because last year wasn't anything to write home about either. I know the quarterback situation isn't that great, but has T.Y. Hilton fallen off? I mean, it's his 9th year in the league. You're not a spring chicken at that point.
Yeah, I think Hilton has fallen off. I think we saw this coming a few years ago. I mean, I was surprised a few years ago when they were now the number doesn't sound so large just given what they're paying these guys, but they were in on like $13 million a year for T.Y. Hilton a few years ago. I just thought, I mean, he's a good player, but he's not that kind of player. You know what I mean? And so I think we've seen it. You know, to me, he's never been a true wide receiver one. Andrew Luck probably made him look a little bit better than he was, just because Andrew Luck was amazing and would throw for 1 million yards every season. So I think that's a big part of it. And yeah, he's old. He's falling off a cliff. I don't trust T.Y. Hilton. Is like he's not valuable. To me, he retains basically no value in fantasy league right
Yep.
now.
All right. Well, they've added starting center Chase. I think his last name is pronounced Roulier of Washington. As questionable because of a knee injury. It's questionable to play Sunday against the Rams. What are we thinking? Is that going? How does that typically affect different players on a team?
Well, it's not good when you're facing Aaron Donald. If that's what you're telling me, and this is a matchup against the Rams. You're talking about the Redskins here.
Well, formerly known
as the Washington football team. I'm in so much trouble erasing that from my memory. I've been saying it for so many years. Yeah, that's a problem, man. I mean, Aaron Donald is already a disruptive force. He's going to be eating people's lunch in the interior of the offensive line. So that's a problem. It's a problem that's a real potential, that's a problem. Is it enough not to start Gibson, or McLaurin? I don't know about that, but it causes you to pause, that's for sure, man. Because once you disrupt, if you're either disrupting the passing game with that kind of pressure, which is a huge issue, or you're getting to the running backs, you're stopping them before they can get started. And, that's potentially a real problem. Fortunately, I think Gibson is a guy that can get in space. You think about the Leonard Fournettes, the Derrick Henrys of the world, some of these guys that if you get them in the backfield before they get started, they got no chance because they just don't have that kind of agility. Gibson could be a little bit different.
Okay. So I'm going to go rapid fire through the remaining games that we haven't talked about, and then we're going to wrap up for the day. We've answered the majority of the questions there. We've talked about Jacksonville. We've talked about Houston. We've talked about Carolina and Atlanta. We've talked about Cincinnati and Baltimore. Did we talk about – we talked about the Chiefs. We haven't really talked about the Raiders.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Raiders this week.
Josh Jacobs, another potentially kind of like buy low candidate this week on the fantasy football trade market. He's got the bye next week. 24 touches a game, basically leads the league in volume on the season. Now we've seen a little bit of decrease in snap count and touches last few weeks on Jacobs, down to that sub 70% snap count, which you really don't like to see for a player like that. You drafted pretty early. You were hoping to become an RB1. But, to me, Jacobs and Miles Sanders was the other guy. Like, once those guys start getting back in the end zone, they're going to be very good players in fantasy again. That's the deal. So I like Jacobs, for volume-based potential rebound this week. I think he's an interesting guy to maybe buy in low on this week or next if we don't see his value rebound. He's the centerpiece of that team. And we can't forget, they've been injured at the wide receiver spot. I think that's hampered the overall offense there with the Raiders. They're about to get Ruggs back. Hopefully that'll open things up a little bit. I mean, he's the guy that creates space for players underneath. And then, who else is there to talk about? Darren Waller's a must start, and I think you're keeping up. Like Henry Ruggs was on some waiver wires this week, or like he was a toxin in some trades this week. If I can get Ruggs as a stash at the bottom of my roster, I'm not going to be holding out. I'm not going to hold my breath or be like planning on really utilizing it, but I think he's just that, a great definition of a high upside stash at the bottom of your bench.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've done most of the teams here. So let me go back to the two last questions. We have a question. We have somebody asking. Here's some background. This person has Kamara, Eckler, Gibson, Gaskin, and Lindsey. Who would you look to trade? This person needs to improve their quarterback and maybe other spots as well.
Okay, well, the first thing, if you need to improve your quarterback, hopefully you have a decent quarterback that you could just package with a flex play and offer to somebody else to level up to a better quarterback. That's the ideal way to pursue a quarterback. Because if you have a decent quarterback on your roster already, you go trade for another quarterback and then you send your current starter to your bench, that's just dead weight. Like, it's a waste. The best way to pursue a quarterback or even a tight end is take your current quarterback, take your current tight end, slap on another good player, package them together, see if you can go pursue a better quarterback or tight end return in a consolidation, in a consolidation type deal. So that's my first piece of advice. Now, if you're not in that situation and you're looking to trade a skill player straight up to improve your quarterback situation or your starting lineup, I think there's two ways to go about doing this. You either look at taking one of your very best players and liquidating them for two really good players that are starters in return that have good matchups this week, preferably guys that are buy lows that you think you're really getting a great deal on. So when you trade somebody like Alvin Kamara, somebody should quote unquote be willing to overpay you. You should get two players in return that really, when you add up their value in your league, is notably greater than just the one player that you're giving away. So that's one way to try to rectify a struggling team with a starting lineup who's got some holes in it. Liquidate, figure out what one of your one or two best players is, try to liquidate those guys. Ideally, you would find one that's like a sell high, and you would look like, if you own Joe Mixon right now, what a great guy to try to liquidate if you're trying to fill these holes. So that's the first two ways I go about doing that. But if you're looking to just
that's unfortunately the only two ways we can cover today, because I just looked at the time and I have to be somewhere at 1:30. It's 1:30. So we have to wrap up. I'm sorry, guys, but this is Yasin with Fantasy Life. We have Byron with Rosterwatch, Rosterwatch.com. And we'll do this next week again and hopefully not end so abruptly. But I got to run, guys. It's been real. Thanks again, Byron. See you, everybody.